There's a problem in data analytics today where we've never found a solution to it. The solution's always eluded us. And what that is what I call last mile data delivery. What that means is we spend all this money, all this energy, loading data, building these amazing platforms that are super fast at crunching numbers, only for at the end of it to face a bottleneck of people and process, because the tooling itself is quite complicated to use. So you have to hire loads of people into these layers of people and process to actually get the data and present it back to you as a decision maker within the organization. That was the same at every business I worked in. And that's the problem that we want to go after. And that's what really, they say it's a founder's itch. And I think that's right. It's like in the back of your mind going,
you want to do that.
We need to solve this. We need to solve this, because it's such a problem for, if you think of all those great companies, their core business isn't data analytics platforms. Their core businesses would be financial products, retail products, media, newspapers. But by spending all this time and energy on this side of the business, you could, if you solved this, you could free them up to work on their core business. And how great, like, would it be an extra 10% the product would be, an extra 20%, 30%?
Yeah.
I don't know. And that was incredibly interesting and exciting for us.
Being a creator, so me and my partner started a Facebook page and we have grown a community of 2 million people over 24 months. And as we're growing this community, the Facebook system spits out quite a lot of data about your demography, about your viewing metrics when you're pushing a content out there. We looked into it, but it is almost like a full-time data analytics job, even after they have given you the graph, to really understand what is going on. So for a small business, this is quite expensive. When I'm putting my hat on as a marketing and sales guy, I understand each organization will probably have myriads of data that is coming through, and that could be useful for understanding where their marketing is or how probably the sales is. There is a bit of play of intuition and hunch, and then there's a play of looking into data. So what I hear from you is that in that layer where people gets involved, decisions are made which is not optimal. You think the problem, please correct me if I'm wrong, you think the problem is basically in the last mile when the analytics are happening and when the decisions are being made through this analytics.
Yeah, correct. And this affects every size of organization, whether it is a small organization who can't afford to spend millions of pounds on these data analytics teams, so they effectively have to make decisions with one eye closed, in a nutshell. Whether it's medium organizations who can afford to hire people into these roles, but the problem is there's far more companies hiring these roles than there are people actually doing it. So even what happens in those medium organizations is people end up competing for the limited availability of the data department, and there's such a demand, such a hunger for data to make their decisions. What happens is you have a request to make a decision, and that can go weeks, months, waiting for your turn in the priority.
Right.
And in the meantime, you've lost that business opportunity. Your marketing campaign may have finished. Like it may have finished. Or a classic example is a company I worked in does Christmas campaigns every year, right? And they're B2C. And they had to start planning that Christmas campaign in June and July. For one of the main reasons was to ensure that they had the time reserved so that they could get the proper support to ensure that that's the best marketing campaign that goes out. So a lot can happen between June and December.
But especially in the age of social media and TikTok and everything, like the way the trend moves is super fast.
Yeah.
And companies need to be more agile to move with that.
Yeah.
And if they can't do it, then they're basically lagging behind.
Yeah. And it gets worse the bigger the organization gets. At an enterprise level, you could have hundreds of thousands, if not thousands of people working here. More people you have, the more managers you need, the more process you need. So the bigger you get, the less agile you get, the less nimble you get, because now you have all of this in the mix. I'm a big fan of, there's a philosophy that Palantir Technology has around AI, and it is that AI is there to enhance the human decision making, not to replace it. So what that means is some people believe that AI is going to take over jobs and just get rid of people. We don't believe that. What we believe is that actually AI should be used to enhance the human's ability to do their core job better. So in marketing's case, if you could just at a click of a button be able to ask a question and get that data that's actually important to what you're trying to decide to do without having to go through all that people and process, then you're ultimately going to do a better job.
So what makes it possible now? Like you mentioned AI, big word. So you mentioned AI. What makes it possible now, things that was not probably out there, let's say, a year ago?
I love that you asked me that question, because the actual idea for Andy isn't something that I had last year, 6 months ago. I actually had this idea 3 years ago. And I looked into it then, but the problem was back then it wasn't financially viable. So I could build our own models for measuring churn, customer acquisition, things like that. And that was not a problem. I could connect to the ad tech platforms, I could pull in all the data. That was fine. But actually, if you're thinking about that last mile, well, one of the key reasons of people sitting in these layers and process is to actually explain it back to you in your bespoke business language.
So you're talking about contextualizing.
Correct, yes. And at the time, building our own large language model to actually give an experience that was actually good enough just wasn't financially viable.
Exactly.
And the thing that changed then in the meantime was you have basically the advent of OpenAI, Gemini, Titan, these large language models which are managed. And what that means is we can effectively rent them. So what that means is we don't need to spend millions and millions of pounds having these teams building these large language models. We can actually get one on demand when we need it. The grunt work of all of this technology exists in the back end, but the actual end of it, where the user sees it, and this is why it's really important to be customer focused, is because the user at the end of it needs to understand it in their language, not in some generic spreadsheet, for example. Then you need someone to interpret it for you. It's like, it doesn't work. So that's what changed in the last 18 months, I would say.